Hello, everybody. I'm just going to give it a few moments for everyone to get situated here. Welcome. All right. I think we're just going to get started. So welcome, everyone. My name is Savannah, and I am the Book Week coordinator with SaskBooks. We are the Provincial Creative Industry Association for book publishing in Saskatchewan. And I am so excited for this reading of Habiba Cooper Diallo's book, Black in School, #Black in School. This event is in partnership with Black in Sask, a youth-led nonprofit dedicated to the holistic growth of the Black community. We have two Black educators who participated in Black and Sask's education panel a few months ago that are joining us, Christian Mbanza and Jessica Walcott, and we're excited to have them here today in discussion with Habiba after her reading. Before we get started, I just wanted to say a few things. First, SaskBooks' head office is located on Treaty 4 territory in Regina. As Saskatchewan's Provincial Creative Industry Association for book publishers, SaskBooks' work reaches lands covered by Treaties 2, 4, 5, 6, 8, and 10, the traditional lands of the Nahiwak, Anishinaabeg, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and Dene peoples, as well as the homeland of the Métis. I'd like to invite everyone in the comments to write the traditional land that you're viewing from. If you don't know, I have a little helpful link for you that will help you identify and find out whose land you're on. And of course, acknowledgement is just one part of a larger commitment. Yesterday was National Truth and Reconciliation Day, but that is an ongoing year-round work and commitment, and we'd like to encourage everyone to read the TRC's calls to action. So if you haven't done that already, here's also another link for you to do that, just to take a look and try and find ways to implement that. We also want to thank our funders, the Department of Canadian Heritage, the Canada Book Fund, and Creative Saskatchewan. Without their support, Book Week would not be possible. So yes, we are so fortunate to have Habiba here with us today. I'm really excited about this reading. This book is really wonderful. So in #Black in School, Habiba Cooper Diallo is her high school journal in which she documents, processes, and resists the systemic racism, microaggressions, stereotypes, and outright racism she experienced in Canada's education system. Powerful and eye-opening, Cooper Diallo illustrates how our schools reinforce rather than erode racism. The handcuffing and frisking of students of color by police at school, one-dimensional, tokenistic curricula portraying Black people, and the constant barrage of overt racism from students and staff alike. She shows how systemic racism works, how it alienates and seeks to destroy a child's sense of self. She shows how our institutions work to erase the lived experiences of Black youth and try to erase youth themselves. So it's with great pleasure that I can introduce our author today. Habiba Cooper Diallo was a finalist in the 2020 Bristol Short Story Prize. She's also one of the 6 finalists in the 2018 London Book Fair Pitch Competition. She's a women's health advocate, passionate about bringing an end to a maternal health condition called obstetric fistula. You can find her on Twitter at Halabiba. That's at HAALABEEBA. So please, can we all give a warm welcome to our wonderful guest tonight? Hello, welcome.
Hello, Savannah. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm honored to be your guest this evening, and thanks to all of the Book Week organizers. It's really a pleasure for me to be with you all today. And so I started. All right. So I'm going to do a reading for about 15 to 20 minutes from my new book, Black in School, that Savannah has already shared with you. So thank you everyone for your attention. Black in School, Autumn 2012. I am a Black student in Canada. April 6, 2013 will mark my 17th birthday and my 13th year in school. I am becoming increasingly aware of the impact of school on the bodies of Black children in Canada. 2 years ago, in the ninth grade, I recall walking down a hallway to attend a school newspaper meeting when I was struck by what I consider to be an extremely disturbing image of Black bodies on the wall. As part of an assignment, students had posted a photograph from the 1984 Ethiopian famine. The bodies depicted were naked, dark, and gaunt, and shown to be crawling. I was horrified, humiliated, and indignant all at once. I quickly went to the school's administration to express my discontent with the photograph. It was removed from the wall the next day. Still, I asked myself, why was I the one to bring the image to the attention of the administration? Had the students who worked on the assignment not been able to see how degrading the image was and assess the impact it would have on Ethiopian children in the school, or on other Blacks and Africans for that matter? Why had the teachers not analyzed the image? Finally, and it is shameful that I must even consider this point, as passers-by, why hadn't other staff found the image problematic? And if they had indeed found it problematic, why had they neglected to express that sentiment? Such experiences are commonplace for Black students. They are incessant, in elementary through high school and beyond. That is, if we are not too discouraged to pursue higher education. Our humanity, it seems, is continually eroded. We experience this through CONY 2012 assemblies in which we are shown videos of slaughtered Black bodies, decapitated and severed. We experience this in the classroom when all the presentations pertaining to Africa harp on the Gothic features of the continent, the perpetual tribal warfare, famine, and disease, or when entering school in the morning and being assaulted by a student's voice. The worst countries to live in are Uganda, Sudan, and Congo. If you walk into one of those places, you'll just die. How is it that such a one-sided story of Blackness and Africa takes precedence? What does it do to one's spirit when one's humanity is constantly under attack? When the Academy, intentionally or not, perpetuates the idea of her subhumanity? When the continent of her origin is reduced to 2 or 3 high-conflict countries? And when the leaders of those countries are belittled? Most importantly, what does this do to this young Black body? Every night on returning home from school, I turn to my diary, an outlet for the release of negative sentiments which lodge themselves in my body throughout the day. Or I immerse myself in reggae and wasulu dance as a way of recharging my spirit by connecting with one of the most intimate aspects of my personhood, my culture, something which is abrogated and denied me, as well as the masses of other Black students in high school. So on to another chapter. This one is titled Hashtag High School and the Black Body. November 15th, 2012. High school hurts the Black body. High school is hard enough on any young body. All students grapple with stress, lack of sleep, lugging heavy textbooks through icy Canadian winters, up and down stairs, and regular teen angst. But there is a whole other layer of constant and in some ways unseen violence that is done to young Black bodies in high school that needs to be recognized, because Black students must also deal with the racial stresses involved in going to school. During the lunch hour, a student quite often remarks, and I've heard it so many times that it's sickening, "Don't waste your food because there are starving children in Africa who would be grateful for it." Or there are places in the world like Africa where children cannot go to school, so be thankful that you're getting an education. Africa has become a kind of punctuation in our sentences, inserted wherever conscience and empathy is needed. Though, is the impetus for these catchphrases about Africa really empathy when students who self-identify as continental African contradict the notions of an impoverished and needy Africa? Eventually, these statements take on the form of violence, epistemic violence, rendering the acquisition of knowledge difficult for the Black student. How is one to concentrate on a chemistry lesson or a biology assignment after being told that Africans, like herself, cannot go to school? High school stigmatizes the Black body. At my school, I recently witnessed the arrest of a Black student. Prior to the incident, two officers were interrogating him and his non Black friend on school property. The latter was escorted back inside the school, while the former was kept outside for further interrogation. I continued to watch through the window. The officers soon began to search him, clearly unable to find anything worthy of arrest. She persisted nonetheless, and in doing so provoked him, for he became frantic, kicking off his shoes and waving his arms as he proclaimed his innocence. The officer was unrelenting. Within seconds, his chest was pressed against the side of the car, his back to me, and his hands cuffed. Adding insult to injury, a student adjacent to me, having also witnessed the arrest, remarked, "He knows the drill." I could feel my heart sink, and soon the tears began to flow, a physical manifestation of the impact of high school on the Black body, as he was driven away, coerced away from an education, from school that we are told is the most essential component of a student's success in the future. We are told that school is a safe and healthy place. Given all that, how can it coexist with legal, police authorized coercion away from learning? High school hinders the Black body. The bell rang exactly 9 minutes after the arrest. Shattered and demoralized as I was, I still had to report to my fourth period biology class. I had to fulfill my academic responsibility. High school nullifies the Black body. In spite of the major contributions Blacks have made and continue to make to Canadian society, and more obviously our sheer presence in the country, in school there is an erasure of the histories and contemporary experiences of Blacks in Canada. During Remembrance Day ceremonies, why don't we remember the Black veterans of World War I from Nova Scotia's Number 2 Construction Battalion? I often look through my textbooks, history, chemistry, and biology, just to name a few, and count the bodies depicted as inventors, prominent political figures, and theoreticians relative to those who are victims of war, inadequate healthcare, famine, and political instability. The former are usually images of white people, while the latter, people of color, typically Blacks. How does the erasure of the Black experience and ultimately the suppression of Black students nullify the Black body? The first strike is psychological. Black students' consciousness of the lack of recognition for the Black experience. This is followed by an emotional response, dejection and apathy towards school, as there is no relevance to the experience for Black students as human beings. Finally, the Black student goes into a state of corporeal shock, questioning the significance of her hair, her features, and fundamentally, her body, in a system that suppresses the expression of her humanity. And I'm going to share with you another chapter called #To Be a Black Student. And this one is from February 1st, 2013. And I open it with a quote from Dambisa Moyo, economist Dambisa Moyo, which I'll just share with you here. Many Africans succumb to the idea that they can't do things because of what society says. Images of Africa are negative: war, corruption, poverty. We need to be proud of our culture. And so now I'm going to read the chapter. My time in school has been enlightening and intellectually stimulating. For literary assignments, I have had the pleasure of reading Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet and Michael Ondaatje's In the Skin of a Lion. I have had the opportunity to listen to Alexandre Trudeau and Michael Ignatieff at school assemblies. I have written about the accomplishments of French microbiologist Louis Pasteur and the military expeditions of Napoleon Bonaparte. However, my experience in school continues to be an emotional and spiritual struggle. My mother can attest. She is the one who is often made to absorb the consequences of this struggle. My tears of indignation, upon returning from an assembly at which a representative from an NGO working in high conflict regions labels Black children as poverty stricken and needy, or my frequent articulation of dampened morale, psychic apathy, and corporeal fatigue. My Black peers share the same sentiments. High school is a collective struggle for Black students. When we come together at each other's homes, at the mall, at the movies, or while attending conferences on Black students' education, we discuss the challenges we face in school and offer one another words of moral support and encouragement. Such creative outlets, meetings, and discussions are forms of individual and collective catharsis. They are imperative for the sustenance of the Black body in high school, yet time consuming as well. They take hours and days in the case of conferences that should go towards fulfilling academic responsibilities, completing homework, studying for tests, or doing research projects. In November 2012, I attended a 3-day conference for Black students that was geared towards providing us with tools on coping with racism in school and letting us know about career pathways and scholarships of which we would otherwise be unaware. Unsurprisingly, we all had stories to share about our encounters with white supremacy and racism in school. It was a transformative experience, however saddening. For 3 days, we had to divorce ourselves from the mainstream or the white high school experience in order to have such discourse. Notwithstanding the inextricable commonalities between the day-to-day lives of Black and white students, as Blacks, our lives are still marginalized. Today, although the majority of Black students in Canadian high schools are Canadian-born, and so spend the same time in the Canadian educational system as our white peers, we are seen as others. My 2 older siblings have also been through high school, up to 18 years earlier than me. Their struggles have not been any different from my own, or using my own gaze, those of my Black peers. So I'm going to stop right there. I just want to do a time check. And I think I can do one more chapter. Savannah, is that all right?
Yeah, that's wonderful, Habiba. Please continue.
Okay, thank you. All right, so this chapter is titled That English Class Was Effed. And this is from April 23rd, 2013. And I open it with a quote from Angie Thomas, author of The Hate You Give. So the quote is, "That's the problem. We let people say stuff, and they say it so much that it becomes okay to them and normal for us. What's the point of having a voice if you're going to be silent in those moments you shouldn't be?" And so here I'll read from the chapter. I get it. I get why Black students drop out. It's the sheer violence we're subjected to every day. I was just in the school washroom and I overheard someone in the stall next to me. "That English class was effed. She always goes on a tangent about Black people. I know racism exists, but there are other things to do." I interrupted and told her that maybe she should take a minute and listen to her teacher's tangents. Because for someone like myself, who experiences racism every day of my life at school and outside, more than going off on a tangent in English class is necessary to even begin talking about racism. She simply stared at me and listened without saying anything. I'm happy I said something, for I think it made her reflect. Oh my God. I feel like a knife has pierced my abdomen. Sickening. High school in the Black body. The chilling thing is that every school day has the potential to be like this. It is one thing to challenge these forms of constant mundane discrimination, but in the end, they can have huge emotional repercussions. Thank you, everyone. So I'll conclude there.
Thank you so much, Habiba, for that wonderful reading. Thank you for sharing that. I'm always like reading the book, I was blown away by how well you articulated the structural things that were going on, and just your language is like so elevated for the high. Like I was just so blown away throughout reading that this was your high school, your high school journal. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, I really appreciate you sharing with us today. We're going to shift a little bit into the discussion portion of
Okay.
the evening, if that sounds good. So I'm going to introduce our panelists. So today we have two Black educators joining us, who were part of Black and Sask's Black in Education panel a few months ago. Jessica Walcott is a French immersion school educator. She is a board director for the Multicultural Council of Saskatchewan and an advocate for diversity, inclusion, and equity in the Canadian school system. She has been a panel participant for discussions about racism in education for Black and Sask, as well as interviewed on Radio Canada to speak about racism in education pertaining to the Francophone community. Originally from Ontario, Jessica has spent the majority of her career teaching in Saskatchewan. And Christian Mbanza currently works with the Regina Catholic School Division, teaching grade 7. He graduated from the University of Regina in 2016 with a bachelor's degree in education and a minor in social studies. He has always been passionate about the youth and contributing to their growth through coaching, mentorship, and serving. Christian is also a strong advocate for youth self-care and mental health. So please join me in welcoming Jessica and Christian. Thank you so much. Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Savannah, for having us. And that was a great book. I can't believe that was your high school experience, Habiba.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
I'm so excited to have all of us in conversation today. When I came across this book, I was really excited about featuring it, and I'm so grateful that Habiba was interested in participating. I felt that it was also important to try and bring the book kind of like, while we know that anti-Blackness is global and that experiences of racism are similar across the board and are shared, I also wanted to bring it into the Saskatchewan context and really provide us an opportunity to like talk about this here and find, obviously the connections are there, but I also wanted to kind of ground it in our community as well. So I'm just really excited. So thank you everyone for being here. My first question is sort of for everyone. Habiba, throughout the book, you kind of speak about going to the school administration and advocating for yourself and calling out racist actions and representations. Like throughout, you were just on top of it. And I was really struck by that, like while reading that, like just how direct and how, I mean, it's one thing to, it's hard to call out your peers. It's hard to call out, people in your immediate circles, but to be able to go to people in positions of power and say, hey, this is not all right. This made me really uncomfortable. I deserve better as a student. To be able to articulate that, I'm curious what or who gave you that sense of empowerment. And then for Christian and Jessica, as educators, how do you empower your students as well? How do you empower them to advocate for themselves and question authority or identify those things that are not okay? I'll go to Habiba first if you wanted to respond, and then to the others.
Oh. Okay. Oh, do you have me?
I don't know where you went.
Oh.
Okay, there you go.
All right. Thank you. It's a great question, and I think I would have to attribute it to how I was raised. I think it goes back to childhood. So many things go back to childhood, and I think that's one of the things. I was brought up in an environment in which I was encouraged, I was affirmed, I was taught to love myself, and I was very well loved, by my parents. I must say that. And they sent us we did Saturday schools, we did Sunday schools, we were in an Afrocentric school for a little while. We did a lot of extracurricular programs that were very culture based, Black African culture based, and I think that really helped to give us a strong sense of self esteem, and a certain level of self love in a society and in a country that does everything to break the self esteem and the sense of self worth of Black children. And it's so sad. And even saying this, I'm so aggrieved to say this, but that's what our country does, to Black children. So I thank my parents because, our home environment was very affirming, like I said, and very encouraging. And they did everything to build us up, to make us feel as if we were the most loved and most important people on the planet. And so going into high school, as hard as certain experiences were for me, and yeah, as hard as they were for me, because you feel uncertain, you feel, should I even be doing this? It comes with anxiety, it comes with fear. But in spite of all of that, I was still able to do it. And I think it's because of what was sort of instilled in me from a very young age. So that's it.
Yeah, the home environment for sure is a good structure to begin with. Jessica and Christian, would you?
So for us, our question is, how do we advocate and empower our students? And for me, I think advocating and teaching them how to advocate for themselves is the easy part. It's the empowering them to identify racist structures that is so difficult. To empower them, I think it starts with the language that we use. We've got to change how we talk and how we speak about things. We've got to show them actual history rather than textbook history. And even role playing as an educator is a huge tool that you can use. I have a drama background. So for me, like, being in character in the moment helps them empathize and be able to feel what other people's experiences are like. If you've ever heard of the brown eyes, blue eyes experiment that was done, that's a really good example of role playing through somebody else's experience. When I looked at the questions and I was looking about how to identify racist situations and how to teach kids that, I had to first self-reflect. And I realized that my way of identifying racial situations is really lacking. Growing up in Canada, I sort of learned to internalize all of my racist interactions and how they feel. So anytime I get this like gut instinctual feeling, I can recognize that, oh no, this is not okay. Something needs to be said. But at the same time, I don't want to pass that on to my students. So for me, I think it needs to, I did a search, okay? So I went online and I searched and I looked up ways to identify racial situations or microaggressions. And what I realized was that there are no resources for people of color. Every single article, every single blog, everything that came back was from the viewpoint of an ally or a white educator telling other white people how to identify racial situations. And I was like, but what about the people who are the victims in this situation? There was nothing. So I think for Saskatchewan education anyway, that would be a huge hurdle that we need to start climbing right now to get over them.
Yeah. And for me, it's all about like teaching the students that they do play a part in history and in society today, no matter how old they are. I know a lot of times, like, we don't give students or young people the credit they deserve for how much that they can come up with and how much that they actually know. Exactly. So the starting point for me is always learning the history, right? So, and there's been such a big anti-Blackness, especially here in Saskatchewan, and basically like a whitewashing of our history, right? Yeah. You go through the history books of Saskatchewan and there's nothing about Black people. But then when you read through the documents and what the government was doing, right, there's a lot there. Like, for example, you talk about the Immigration Act of 1911, where they literally banned Black people from coming to Canada, right? So just looking through those documents and then just looking and talking about topics such as like injustices, right? Like what's just and what's unjust, like what's wrong and what's right, just as far as just being a human being, right? And how you treat other people, right? So that they fit in that narrative. And then also storytelling, and then just imagination. They love using books, but then again, it's like, as Jess was talking about, is like the history that we've been taught is like the books that we read are like To Kill a Mockingbird, right? Where it's like a black person does something wrong and then a white person comes to save
It's
them,
the white
right?
savior
Right, the
complex.
white savior complex, right? That's like the history that we were taught, right? So just using novels from like Maya Angelou and Langston Hughes, like authors who like empower black stories, right? Using those to tell stories to children and not just giving them the slave perspective, and then they get to see black people in a different light. So yeah, just creating that sense of awareness in students, I think, is where I usually tend to start, and then moving forward from there.
Thank you all so much. I'm so surprised, but not surprised at all to hear that, Jessica, about your little research that you were doing. And it kind of leads me into my next question, which is what kind of tools and supports do Black students need, or that you wish you had as a student? So I'm just, even what you were just talking about, that there isn't anything out there for students to identify or for young folks to identify what is, situations, and be able to kind of interpret or break it down. So something like that, but also just broadly, what kind of tools do Black students need, or do you wish you had? And then for Christian and Jessica, if you want to speak in addition to that to the Saskatchewan context, because again, it is like you're sort of describing, Christian, with the history. I think being Black in Saskatchewan is quite different from being Black in other places, especially because like at some place like Toronto, you have a like larger population, a larger presence. On the East Coast, you have like kind of like a history and more conversation around like the Black Scotians, the loyalists, and I think you're definitely speaking to something, Christian, when you're talking about the sort of absence and like heightened erasure. There's erasure across the board, but especially in the prairies, there's been kind of more of a whitewashing, as you say. So anyways, I would love to hear what kind of tools.
That's like going off of what you're saying is like when we do learn Black history, right? And so even in Saskatchewan, is we will learn about the Loyalists or Africville, what happened in the east of Canada, right? Nothing about the prairies, when there is like a rich history of black history in Saskatchewan alone, right? Or just the prairies overall, right? Talking about Amberville, and the Oklahoma settlers that were a self-sufficient group, thousands of Black settlers that came, right? And basically the Immigration Act came because of them, right? So just a lot of the non-existent resources. So I think what would help Black students is including resources from the Black perspective, right? Seeing themselves in that narrative. And then also finally, the biggest thing for me, I think, is representation, right? Especially here in Saskatchewan. It's like people say there aren't any Black people, but then you look at statistics and the prairies are like the fastest growing amongst Black people in Canada, right? And so then you look in employment and across the 5 sectors, and Black people aren't well represented. So I think for students, that would be the biggest thing that they would need, is having more Black teachers, having more Black doctors, more Black nurses. So again, that starts with hiring those people who are more than capable to do those jobs. So that's what I would say.
And for me, I think building off of what Habiba said about her experience, she had such a strong sense of self because she had access to cultural activities, Black spaces. That doesn't exist here in the prairies yet. So we need to see an increase in those. I also think that anti-racist training and anti-Black training in particular, not just in education, but across all government sectors, needs to happen for current staff as well as any new staff that's hired. We also need to, like Christian said, be willing to hire diversely. There are a ton of people here who are just not represented in any positions of power. They're not the ones, their voices aren't being heard. And because of that, decisions are being made without their input. And it shows, like, even at our school right now, we are probably the most diverse staff in RCSD.
Yeah, I would say.
But at the same time, we have 0 First Nations at all. There's no Asian teachers at all. There's no Hispanic teachers at all. Like, there's such little representation. And there are only 5 male teachers in a staff of 40 plus.
Yeah.
And of those 5 male teachers, only 1 is Black. And of those 4 male teachers that are left, 2 of them are our admin. So,
and I think even just to add to that, like you look at it on a larger scale, and principals and administrations across the board at higher levels, there are no representations of that.
I haven't seen any principals or admin that are people of color.
Right. And so there even go as far as putting pictures of all the principals in the system
on a wall,
and you can just see the representation and you can just imagine what that looks like, what that wall looks like, right? So I think when we speak about change and representation, it starts not only just at the like the boot level, but also all the way up, right? It starts at the higher level.
Yeah. And we also need to be able to decolonize our teaching materials.
Right.
Like, for example, in our CSD, we teach religion, but every single picture of Jesus is white. I'm like, let's make it historically accurate.
Yeah.
We can still teach about religion and still spread the gospel if it's done properly.
Right. And I think that just even speaks to feeling a part of the narrative, right? You see that for students, it's like, why do I want to learn about that or be a part of that?
Why does it matter?
Yeah, why does it matter? I don't see myself fitting in that. And I think for a long time that's gone unrecognized. It's how important it is to see people that look like you, right? In every sphere, right? Of our spaces.
Because everybody's claiming like diversity and inclusion, but we're not actually including everybody.
Right. It almost seems like the diversity and equity used to be such a checklist, right? Did we talk about it? Do we mention it on our website? Okay, sounds good.
Great, we're done.
Right. And so that's where our voices weren't heard, right? For people who grew up in the prairies. And it's like, well, it's more than that, right? It's more than just celebrating Black History Month and then moving on. Right. It's celebrated at all. Right. It's making your students feel a part of the narrative all 12 months or all 10 months of the school year. Right.
Like
absolutely. Sorry. And just sorry. Also, I just want to get your take on this too. I just, thinking about your perspective in the book and your experiences there, like, what do you think in addition to like sort of what Christian and Jessica were just sort of speaking to, like reflecting back on that, like your journal? I think you in your introduction you mentioned like the kind of feeling of sadness and like all those experiences. Like what do you wish you had, and what would you kind of hope for someone else in that position?
Yeah, it's great. So in addition to what they've said, I would say for the teachers to be knowledgeable. There's such a huge onus that's put on Black students and say the Black teachers, let's get more Black teachers, which we definitely need that, But white teachers and other teachers of color, they're educating Black students, so they must know too. They are the tools. Why, as Black students, must we go in at such a young age having to know everything, having to do everything, having to defend ourselves? That's not, no. It doesn't work. The white staff, the white principals, they need to know about these things. They need to do the learning, right? To teach us. We go to learn. We go to school to learn. We don't go to school to teach. As a Black student, you're there to learn. You shouldn't have to now have strategies and tools, and it's not your job. But unfortunately, because of the climate we live in, the racial climate we live in this country. We have to go in with tools. But what I would want to see is for the teachers, the white teachers and white educators, to be the tools themselves, so start by educating themselves, start by making the curriculum relevant. When we learn about, say, Jacques Cartier and Samuel de Champlain in the early explorers, elementary school, that's when we learned about them. The early settlers, like early settlers and early explorers to Canada. What does that do, that history? It centers the white students in the classroom because they can relate to it. They can say, oh, my ancestors, those are their ancestors. So we too, as Black students, we need to be centered. We need to be able to locate ourselves. And our history is there. Our ancestors were here too, in the prairies, like what Jessica and Christian just mentioned, the history of Blacks in the prairies and the immigration acts and all of that. And then here in the East Coast, they've been here in Ontario, Chatham, Buxton, those communities. So our ancestors as Black people have been here too, but it's not in any history curriculum in Canada. So you cannot just center one group of people and not the other. Every child in the classroom, whether Black, Indian, Chinese, Indigenous, so forth, needs their story to be told by their educators. It's not enough to just center one type of student, as in white students. So I want the teachers to be the tools. They need to be the tools. I don't want Black students to be expected to go in with tools and strategies at 10 years old, at 15 years old, at 16 years old. That's not their job. It's not their job to do that. So that's my answer.
Thank you so much. And yeah, exactly. I love that. Want to write that down. The white educators being the tools. I don't know what Oprah says, but she talks about an aha moment. That feels like one. Thank you so much. I have another question as well for you. So you wrote the book, the journal entries in grade 11 and 12, and now your book is published, and we're celebrating this wonderful piece of work. We're also like, I want to know if you think anything has shifted or changed, because we know a lot just stays the same, but I'm curious in terms of your sort of, in your perspective, has anything changed since this post sort of George Floyd moment and people, talking about anti-racist education a lot more? I'm just curious your take on that. Do you actually think there's been any substantial change?
I would like to say yes. Based on what I've seen online in the social media space, I do see a lot of white educators, perhaps you might want to call them like woke white educators, saying that they're doing a lot of anti-racism and anti-Black racism teaching with their students. They're making their English literature students read certain materials, such as my book and things like that. So that's positive. That's very encouraging, when I see that. And I see Black students across the country in high school leading protests about different racial issues in their schools. In Halifax, where I was in high school, at least 2 high schools, I saw stories of Black students organizing, trying to get the Black student support worker an office at one school, at my former high school, actually. In another news report, there were Black high school students protesting against something else. I think it had to do with George Floyd, but some other racist issue, they were protesting about it. So I was very impressed because it's high school. We usually expect these things from higher level students, as in university. It's common in university to see such mobilization and protest, but to see it in high school is very impressive. So I feel that many young Black high school students, they feel emboldened and they're not shy to make their voices heard. And I like that. So in that sense, I feel that things are changing. Yes.
Thank you for that, Habiba. And I'd like to also sort of bring this to Christian and Jessica as well. As educators, and Christian as someone involved in Black and Sask, which sort of emerged, I think, more like became more active like last year around that time, from what I understand. Have you all seen any substantial changes from your end in terms of policy? I saw somewhere that the police services had reached out to you, and so like I know that there are things that have like been in the works, and I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like in terms of like policy change, all of those things are going to take time. You mean like reading through documents and all of those things, naturally it does take time to create those changes. So I feel like people and stakeholders and organizations are more willing to hear our stories and also are more receptive to what we have to say. So that's one thing I will say is that I've noticed in all of this is people are more willing to hear our stories because our stories haven't changed, to be honest, or they haven't gotten newer. You know, these aren't new experiences for any of us, right? But people are just willing now to listen to what we have to say.
Mhm. And for me, in terms of being in the classroom every day and in the school environment, because these things take time, I haven't seen any substantial like policy change or um, offered PD, like professional development for teachers, or even our work culture, other than the fact that I find my colleagues are more hesitant to speak out. They're willing to listen and and hear our stories, but to speak out and like take that step forward, they're they're almost scared to be labeled as like a non-ally or something like that, or to like have a different opinion or something like that. I find it's just nothing's changed on the ground level yet, but things are definitely starting to pick up pace in the policy area and putting things into effect that hopefully will see the fruits of their labor in the future.
Thank you both for that perspective. I have another question too, and actually, Habiba, you sort of mentioned this when you were talking about sort of that sense of empowerment and where you got that you were involved in those like kind of programs that allowed you to like see yourself reflected. So I'm curious, like, to hear your perspective. Are Western education systems inherently colonial and racist from your perspective? What do you think about those educational alternatives, such as like freedom schools? They have one of those in Toronto, and Black Sunday schools that you were kind of another programming that you were sort of mentioning. What do you think about that? And yeah, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Oh, sorry, you're actually muted.
Okay, thanks. Yes, so I would say they are inherently colonial and racist, and they weren't built with diverse people in mind. Think about it. At the times that these curricula were being created, they were during the colonial era, and so all of these ideas about equity, about diversity, about different races, at the time they were non-existent. It was the white race that was dominant, that was hegemonic, and the belief was that the white race would be forever dominant, and in those times when these curricula were being created, Black people were either enslaved or working as indentured laborers or something like that, low paid workers, domestic immigration schemes. So there was never the idea that one day their children could be in classrooms with white children learning the same curriculum, but now that's the reality. So it does need to be changed altogether, the curricula. uh, and I guess until then, or in addition to that, in addition to those curriculum changes, Black parents should send their children to alternative programs on the weekends, or as much as they're able to. You know, culture camps in the summer, whatever cultural programming activities parents are able to find. for their children. Sunday schools, you mentioned Sunday schools. So I definitely think, that should happen, that parents should do that.
And I wonder, Christian and Jessica, like, if you know of anything in the province, in the area that resembles anything like that. I haven't heard of anything, but I'm curious if y'all have heard of anything that's kind of in that vein, or what could you imagine that looking like in Saskatchewan?
I think if anything like a freedom school were to be established in Saskatchewan, it would probably look like a First Nations school that's run first before they addressed any other sort of ethnicity, just because of the population of Indigenous people here. But I could see a freedom school more than, say, like a Sunday school. I don't think they would go the religious route.
Yeah.
I think it would be more so like a multicultural type of thing that would then broaden to different cultures or encompass several different cultures. So I don't think there's a large enough population in Saskatchewan of Black people all in the same area to see that become a reality yet.
Yeah.
Like, we are steadily growing, but there's not enough in one location. We're still pretty spread out.
Yeah, I think ultimately it's like we still need more resources, more diverse resources first, before we think of like freedom schools or anything. But I guess the alternative is that Black students are just researching their own history and learning it at home, right? So
Parents have to pick up that mantle,
right, and teach them
their
that,
children.
right? So I think just like the lack of like true diverse resources as far as it comes to like Indigenous culture, which is growing here in Saskatchewan, as far as the resources go. But so as far as the other stuff goes, it'd be tougher to address that.
Yeah, or just establish something up here.
Right.
Yeah, just one thing, if I may. The Black community can start it. I don't know, when you said perhaps an Indigenous school would happen before like a Black cultural school, are you thinking that the government would do it? Because I'm thinking the community would. Yeah, the community can do even if the population is small, the community can just start one, even if there are just maybe even 5 or 10 kids in attendance. Just an idea.
Yeah. So
I
I think
love that idea.
I think that would be important, right? So where the lack is the lack of resources, right? It's like people are still having to do their own research about the history of Black people in Saskatchewan. There is a Black in CBC program that was started, which tells the story, about Black people in Saskatchewan, which finally is a resources that people can use and. Right, that tells diverse stories from Alberta all the way to Manitoba.
But it's not very well known.
Right, again, which isn't very well known yet, right?
Okay.
But I love that idea. That gives me a lot of excitement and hope, because I think it has to come from the community. Going back to my initial question, if we are working from that place that schools are inherently, racist and colonial, it must come from that grassroots level to serve us. So thank you for that as well, Habiba. That's a great point. And maybe Christian and Jessica, I'll be bugging you about this another time. I don't know. I want to end with one question. Just one last question. In your book, Habiba, you speak about how dance and journaling kind of provided refuge for you, and I would love to hear from everyone what is providing you with hope and joy, bringing that into your life, despite all the heaviness, and something that's energizing you and that keeps you going.
Yeah, it's an excellent question. So definitely the journaling, the dancing, the music, my faith as well. I pray regularly. That's built into my regular schedule, a lot of praying and connecting with God and meditating as much as I can. Because, we're living in such crazy times now with the pandemic, but then we as Black people, we've never been spared of racism in spite of the pandemic. George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, perfect examples. This pandemic, lockdown, everyone was supposed to be at home, isolated. yet they were not protected. That didn't even serve as a protection for them. So we have this double burden, sadly. So we do need to find ways to keep ourselves sane. And so I love reading in the evening, novels. I love novels, fiction. It's just wonderful, it takes you into another world, and just really a wonderful, wonderful outlet. So that's some of what I do, and it's a work in progress, I must say, because as much as I have access to my fiction, to my journaling, to all that I do, I have to make sure that I do it. I have to make sure that I keep it up, that I'm mindful of it, that I actually do it. So yeah, and I guess while I'm here and I have the platform, I'll just offer a word of encouragement to everyone, and just say that I hope we can all lead with compassion, because it is such hard times, and it's hard for everyone. It's been a hard year for me, the pandemic and all of this. So I think we do need to find ways to self-sustain and to protect ourselves mentally. And I'm still learning and accepting strategies from people on how to do it, because I don't have all the answers either. But those are some of the things I do, and I'll pass it over to Jessica and Christian now.
Yeah, thank you, Habiba. I would say what brings me joy, especially through the pandemic, has been my family. So I actually got married during the pandemic. So,
Congratulations.
thank you. It was quite an experience, very stressful planning a wedding during a pandemic, but being able to reconnect and touch base with my grandmother, my mother, my parents, my father. And I was lucky enough to have my sisters and some cousins here, but making time regularly to meet with people and commune with people and being able to just enjoy each other's company. I'm a foodie as well, so being able to eat good food tastes nice. And I do journal from time to time, and I feel I've gotten into painting recently. Just not for anything. I'll get like a dollar store canvas and just, spend a half an hour just seeing what comes to the canvas. But that and my daughter, she keeps me very young. Spending time with her, she's so hopeful, and I think it's my need to protect her from what I know is out there in the world that drives me to be a better educator and a better teacher and a better advocate for Black people in general. Because as a mother, you want the best for your child, and I refuse to let my child experience the microaggressions, the things that I experienced as a child growing up in Canada. I understand that we can't protect them from everything, but if there's something that I can change, I am definitely going to try and do my best to change it. Yeah.
And for me, it's just coming back to school. It's given me an opportunity, like a renewed sense of opportunity to be a part of the conversation again, and just like seeing the conversations that the kids are able to have. I teach grade 7, so at 12 years old, they're able to have such in-depth conversations about the world and race and all these different things. So that's what continues to give me hope, and just like the continued conversation, and then just the idea of long-term change, that maybe down the future, like there's people who won't have to go through the struggles that we went through when we were in high school, and they actually have teachers who are protecting them, as opposed to like forcing them to be in this negative spotlight, right? To be like the teachers for their class, right? So those things kind of give me hope. And then as far as what keeps me going is just like also being a part of the conversations in Black and Sask, right? Having those conversations with the members of the group, and then just the behind the scenes work that we're also doing in the conversations with the people we're having, and how receptive they are. Those things bring me a lot of joy and just kind of keep me hopeful and keep me going.
Thank you so much, everyone. It's been an honor to be here with you tonight. And Habiba, thank you for writing this book. Thank you for sharing your experiences and speaking so eloquently about what you faced. I think it will resonate with everyone who hasn't read it. Please read this book. And actually, I'm going to put a link in the chat as well. Please buy this book from from the University of Regina Press or from independent independent bookstores, or from Black-owned bookstores. Either, please buy the book and support this wonderful project. It has been an honor to hear you read tonight and to hear your insights, Habiba. I'm so grateful that you joined us. Jessica and Christian, thank you so much for participating as well and bringing in that perspective. I'm just so excited that we were all able to do this together. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Thank you to Mwila at Black and Sask for all that you've done. Thanks to my coworkers, Dan, Jill, Emily, you are amazing. So anyway, thank you so much for joining in this important conversation, and I hope you all have a wonderful evening.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Savannah, for inviting me, and Jessica and Christian for your lovely contributions. It was such a beautiful conversation we all had this evening.
Yes. Thank you, everybody,
Thanks,
too,
Habiba.
for inviting us, for hosting Savannah and Habiba. Your book was fantastic. It resonated with me. Just know that
so
you're not
happy to
alone in
hear.
your experiences.
Thank you. It's reassuring. It is to know
Yeah.
that I'm not alone. Yeah. Thank you all.
Thank you. And good evening, everyone.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Good evening to you all. Bye.
Bye.